Welcome to Connected Leadership. I'm your host, Kimberly Dinville, the founder of Comet Leadership Development. My passion is helping others to develop their own leadership style and skills. Whether it's through one-on-one mentoring, writing, or speaking to groups of people, I love to discuss topics related to leadership and people management. We believe that anyone can be a leader, whether you're a people manager or not. We want to help you build the skills that help you connect and motivate people so they can reach their full potential. Thank you for joining us today, and let's dive in. Today's topic is something that occurs in both business and in our personal lives. We're going to talk about internal dissonance, that conflict that happens inside your mind. There are different forms that it takes, and today we're going to cover a couple of common variations. We'll also discuss what you can do to help address this within yourself or within your team. We're going to start with what I call the head-heart dissonance, or it's more of a logic versus emotion dissonance. This is one of the more common internal conflicts that arises. This is where your head, or logic, tells you one thing, but your heart, the emotions, say something different. There have been many instances where I walked into my boss's office and said, "Boss, I'm having a head-heart argument." Now, for us, this was usually met with well, let's go get a donut and talk. And then we'd sit down and talk about what was causing the disparity between what I knew and what I was feeling. For me personally, these conflicts usually boil down to two problems: my personal standards and expectations, and my perception. As the person on the outside, particularly as a leader, such as my old boss, there are going to be times when you are going to have to help someone realize that they are suffering from this internal conflict. When stress is high, it becomes easier for the heart to shout louder than the head. Within my teams, I have tended to see this among the high achievers who feel like things are failing or going to fail, and then they allow the stress to build up. Or maybe I just recognize in others what I tend to deal with myself. Another area of dissonance that causes discomfort is the business versus personal dissonance. This is when your professional actions run contrary to your personal beliefs. Now, obviously, if someone is asking you to break your ethics and morals, that's not a healthy environment for you to be in. And that's not really what we're talking about today. What we're talking about is something far more subtle. There may be things that you personally enjoy or want to have as benefits for yourself and for others, but they become challenging in a business environment. A rather extreme and rather unlikely scenario would be 9 months of paid leave for every employee every year at full salary. I think we'd all like to be able to work for only 3 months out of a year for a full year's wage. In this rather extreme example, I may experience a dissonance if I personally believe in such a 9-month yearly sabbatical, but I hate the process from a business perspective because it makes it very difficult for me to run my teams and for me to effectively manage my business. This isn't to say that the disconnect is bad. Having the ability to appreciate both sides allows you to more fully evaluate where the appropriate middle ground lays. I appreciate the desire for lengthy time off, but I also understand the difficulty it causes for the business. Perhaps I find something more palatable to both sides, like a 4-month time off plan. And by the way, if you find one of those, please let me know. Understand that experiencing dissonance in and of itself is not bad. whether in that business versus personal space or in the head versus heart space. We simply need to be mindful that this causes discomfort. And if that discomfort grows too large, usually under times of stress, we need to find ways to help reconcile these two sides. So how do you deal with dissonance? For a lot of people, the simple act of talking about the issue can be sufficient to balance out the points of view. Having the ability to articulate both sides of an internal conflict can help to move the 2 points of view towards a middle ground. As we talk out loud, we force the thoughts in our heads to go slower, and you hear yourself speaking. This gives the brain a little extra time to think on what you're saying. When the voice is only internal, thoughts tend to go faster and sometimes around in a circle. So when I recognize that someone is dealing with high stress and struggling with dissonance, even when it's happening to me, I ask them to start breaking down the problems. What is really bothering you? And in particular, what's bothering you right now? What's shouting in the front of your head or in the front of your heart? And then we start looking at why. Why is this causing strife? Why is this thing that's bothering you? What about it is really bothering you? And is that thing that's bothering you hold true? Or are you dealing with perception? If the person I'm working with is struggling to reconcile their personal point of view with a corporate policy, then I may sit down and talk through the whys and evaluate if there's something that can be changed to address it. If they're having a more personal issue, if they're having problems with that head versus heart, then frequently I'll sit down and discuss what logic is saying, what is the head saying, versus what they're feeling. And we'll talk through whether there's a perception issue. Is this something where their gut is right and logic has the facts all wrong? Or is logic really there, but they're just struggling to emotionally come to terms with it? Here's a real life example. A manager is visibly stressed and they seem to be right on the edge of breaking. So I asked him to come talk to me about what's causing his stress. He tells me that everything is on fire and a major project is failing. Of course, everything on fire is a really broad statement. We certainly had a lot of work to do and a few areas that required more focus, but I didn't see any indication of failure. So, as his leader, my first action was reassure him that I did not think he was failing. But I wanted to understand why he felt this way. So I asked him to talk a little bit more about it. Why do you feel like you're failing? So the manager began to list out the different whys behind his stress. And then we addressed each one in turn. He had a list. There were 4 or 5 different things that he all felt indicated he was failing and things were going to just burn down to the ground. But as we started talking, we found some items were founded, and then we sat down and talked through our action plans on how to correct the problem or set up different contingencies. Some of the things listed were purely perception, and we talked about alternative perspectives to what he was feeling. On a more personal example, I was getting stressed as I was struggling to get through a task. I didn't feel like I was moving fast enough and that the quality was suffering. Oh my God, everybody was going to be disappointed. That was my heart talking. My head was meanwhile saying everything was fine, I shouldn't be worried, and people were grateful that I was just taking care of the task. So how did I personally reconcile this? Well, essentially the same way I approached my manager above. I listed out the whys, and I addressed each one in turn. I started with, I'm not moving fast enough. So the question was, who set the deadline? Well, I did. It wasn't as if someone else was expecting it at a set time. No, they weren't. So why was I putting so much pressure on myself to move faster? The next item was quality was suffering. Well, who says the quality is bad? It was me, in case you couldn't figure that one out. Okay, so I had to sit down and honestly assess, is the quality poor, or was I fighting with perfection? It turned out to be a little bit of both, if I'm being honest. So I had to change tactics, move it to good enough, and stop worrying about perfect. And then I hit the big one. Everyone will be disappointed. And you know, logic really won this argument. Once I got the heart to discuss rationally, rather than just shouting, my head actually sat down and won the argument. So I want you to remember that dissonance, that disconnect, is natural, and it has its uses. The key is to be aware and mindful of when it starts to cause undue stress. And that's when you need to step in to take appropriate action. That's all for this episode. Thank you for joining in and listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you can be alerted when the next episode comes out. If you want to get more detail on today's topic, or you want to check out our other material, please visit us at cometleadership.com. You'll find a series of articles, templates, and training material. You can also email me directly at kimberly@cometleadership.com. Thanks for listening and have a fantastic day.